All right, well then, is the judge ready?
Yeah.
All right, and the time. All right, and we'll go again. Ingenuity and technology have opened up nearly limitless opportunities, wealth, and indeed power for the United States of America. But we all know that with great power comes great responsibility. Unfortunately, in recent years, the United States has been shirking its responsibility both to the environment as well as to the principles of justice, which is why my partner and I stand resolved that the United States federal government should significantly reform its environmental policy. Before we go any further, it's going to be important to define a couple of key terms that will come up again and again in today's round. So to that end, we define environmental policy as a government policy that explicitly intends to promote environmental protection, conservation, and rational use of natural resources. Significant will be defined as having or likely to have influence or effect. And finally, justice will be defined as the upholding of what is just, especially fair treatment and due reward in accordance with honor, standards, or law. Now, the affirmative believes that today's round ought to be judged under a criterion of justice. By saying this, we're not saying justice should be the only thing looked at in today's round, but rather that it ought to be a significant reason for U.S. policy change if the current situation is unjust, and the affirmative team can provide a more just situation through our plan. The reason for this is that the United States ought to always focus on justice first when we look at our policies, because justice is the glue that holds our society together. Without that guarantee of justice and equal opportunity, the American dream simply wouldn't exist. So with that, let's move to inherency. Today we're going to be dealing with the issue of e-waste, or basically used electronics that are now ready to be disposed of. We are just beginning an era where a massive numbers of computers, cell phones, and any number of other devices will fall into this category, and unfortunately so far, our policy has not kept up with these emerging problems. Rather, we export our e-waste to poor developing countries around the world. And that's our first inherency point. We export our e-waste problem to poor countries around the world. From the Electronics Take Back Coalition 2009, they say, quote, many electronics recyclers don't actually recycle the electronics they collect. They can make more money by selling old electronic products to exporting waste traders than by processing it here in the U.S. Traders then send it to developing countries, where workers earn extremely low wages, and where health, safety, environmental laws, and citizens' rights are all very weak. Simply stated, we are solving our e-waste problem by exporting it to poor countries around the globe, end quote. Now, exporting things isn't always a bad thing, you might say, and we would agree, except that our export of this toxic e-waste causes the following massive harms. Harm 1, justice, harm. Justice, harm. It's from the Seattle Journal for Social Justice 2009. They say, quote, it is fundamentally unjust for the United States to ship its toxic e-waste it does not want in its own landfills to poor developing countries in the name of recycling or reuse. The United States' good intentions of protecting its own citizens and environment should not be effectuated at the cost of the health and environment of the world's poorest nations, which neither generate this waste nor have the capacity to safely handle the waste. As we can see, it is simply unjust for the United States, a developed country reaping the benefits of the technical revolution, to export our e-waste to developing countries, which then reap none of the benefits and are left with all of the problems. That leads us to our second harm. Health is harmed. Health is harmed. Subpoint A, in the developing world, health is harmed. This is from the Virginia Environmental Law Journal 2010. They say, quote, ultimately, e-waste often ends up in locations where hundreds of men, women, and small children break apart computer monitors and televisions with their bare hands. Disassembly at these locations can involve open air burning of wire to recover copper and open acid baths for separating out metals. Workers have suffered damage to their nervous systems, brains, and other organs. In nearby rivers, lead levels are 190 times the drinking water standard set by the World Health Organization, end quote. And then subpoint B is that health is harmed in the United States. Health is harmed in the United States. This is from Dr. Jeffrey Whitenham, professor of chemistry at Ashland University, who says, quote, news stories over the past 2 years have highlighted recall after recall of Chinese-made imports for lead contamination. Yet at the same time, the U.S. has continued to export large quantities of toxic electronic waste to China and other nations, where it is recycled in very crude ways. Evidence suggests that some of this recycled material may come back to haunt us in the form of contaminated products such as children's jewelry, end quote. Obviously, the export of our e-waste to developing countries where they simply don't have the technology to handle it not only harms the health of the workers, but indeed can harm our health as well. And our third harm here today is that developing countries are crippled by the e-waste trade. Developing countries are crippled by the e-waste trade. Seattle Journal for Social Justice 2009, they say, quote, the e-waste trade compromises the economic potential of developing countries, making it even more difficult for them to overcome their developmental hurdles. The toxic waste contaminates the soil, the groundwater, and the food chain, which is especially harmful to these countries' subsistence farmers and agrarian economies. In addition, the opportunity cost of resources redirected from education or infrastructure building to deal with the ill health that is caused by polluted water and food sources are significant, end quote. We see here that not only does our export of toxic e-waste cause health problems for the workers, but truly harms the entire developing nation. And our fourth harm is lost opportunities in the United States. Lost opportunities in the United States. Subpoint A is that e-waste recycling creates valuable jobs. This is from EMPA Materials Science and Technology Research Institute, August 2001-2009. They say, quote, in addition, the process of recycling e-waste offers new business opportunities and creates valuable jobs in the area of recovery and reuse of the valuable materials it contains. And subpoint B is that exports happen because of ease of access. Exports happen because of ease of access. Seattle Journal for Social Justice, 2009. They say, quote, the export of toxic e-waste from rich developed countries to poor developing countries is a consequence of global economic forces because hazardous waste generally follows the path of least resistance, that of lower costs and lower standards, end quote. In the end, justice is harmed, healthy people infected, developing countries are crippled, and the United States loses out on an opportunity to build up our own economy. As a result, we propose the following plan. Mandate 1, ban e-waste exports. Ban e-waste exports. The export of e-waste from the United States to any developing country or any country that lacks an environmentally sound way of dealing with that waste will be banned. Mandate 2, customs enforcement. Customs enforcement. U.S. Customs will develop shipping codes for e-waste and used electronics, and the export of containers of either of these goods will be placed on a watch list for special interest and regulation in order to ensure that e-waste and used electronics are not exported to countries that do not have an environmentally sound manner of dealing with this waste. Enforcement will be through the penalties and systems already within the status quo, and any additional funding will be applied for and evaluated through the normal budgetary process. Now, our plan should be passed because it helps solve the harms. It helps solve the harms. Solvency point 1 is that a U.S. ban of exports is necessary to stop the flow of e-waste. Virginia Environmental Law Journal, 2010, quote, as in the EU, e-waste should not be shipped abroad. Foreign government agencies are trying to stop the flow of waste into their countries, but there is simply too much waste flowing, and the recipient countries only have limited resources. A national e-waste strategy must address this problem and bar the export of e-waste to developing countries, end quote. And finally, our plan should be passed because it provides us with the following advantage. Justice upheld. Justice upheld. Now, we're all taught from a young age that when you make a mess, you need to clean it up. It's just that simple, and it should apply to our nation as well, not just to small children. Unfortunately, in recent years, the U.S. has been making a mess with our toxic e-waste, but then asking those who are incapable to clean it up for us. This is simply unjust. Our plan stops this and forces the U.S. to take responsibility for its own actions. In conclusion, we have showed you that justice ought to be the standard by which this round is judged. Next, we showed you that that standard is violated by current U.S. policy, and that that violation causes massive harms, both at home and abroad. We gave you a plan, demonstrated that it would help to mitigate these harms, and finally showed you that justice would be upheld. As a result, we would urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you, and I now stand ready for cross-examination.